G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. Ukraine War Update for the 14th of August 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cade, Power Games, Into the Ellsbound, and Erotic Tower from the Empire. Part 1 is available now. I'd like to start off with an apology. I think I said the other day that Russia has taken 25%. It was actually 20%. Now, I don't know where I got the figure from. So, somewhere along the way, I did get the wrong figure. But what struck me is that I think it was actually, what I meant to say was 20.5%. And that's because looking back at some of the articles, so it was just, I know it's a lot of land difference, and it's a minor mistake. But of course, the Ukis, they pounce on every mistake you make. But of course, they never go after their own for their lies, their propaganda, their cope and seethe. And there's a lot of Ukis out there with cope and seethe who merely want their daily dose of dopamine, you know? Just get their ego stroked, told what good little Nazis they are. I mean, good little boys they are. Sorry, not allowed to say the Nazis. So they're good little Nazis, right? And you know, absolutely, I'm being shadow banned. People are telling me they saw my videos, but the view counts don't. Here's the problem: the view counts aren't being counted properly. I can't remember who told me, but they sent me a video and some sort of explanation on how the new YouTube algorithm is supposed to work. And basically, they're supposed to get me to beg you to either like a video or to comment on a video. And they don't like any form of promotion. That's why I've been shadow banned. They don't like any promotion. They want everything in the YouTube ecosphere. They don't want channel growth they don't want patrons. They don't want anything outside of the Google sphere. If you have a merch shop, you're not allowed to mention it. Apparently I've broken all the rules of YouTube. All of them. No, and you may not believe this, but people who get promoted, they're using AI-generated thumbnails, okay? AI-generated text, all the things, right? All the things. Now, I do not know enough from you through the lack of feedback what you really want. So, but I am merely here because I observed in my study to write better, to study war, to write military action and actual combat better, to give you a feel in my writing that the combat is harrowing, psyche-destroying, mind-numbing, and repetitive. You don't have, in the real world, you don't have enemy variety. You don't have, right, multiple guns. You don't have all these video game advantages. And I think this disconnect is seeping over where people are looking at Ukraine and just going, why don't the Ukrainians just do this and why don't they do that? Because in the real world, things take resources, things take time and training. And the Ukrainians can't do anything on the battlefield without the Russians seeing it. The Russians may be weak in many areas. Some tell me the T-90 in particular. But when it comes down to combat range, They have a clear advantage over the Ukrainians. Combat volume. Russians have more artillery than the Ukrainians. And surveillance. The Russians have way better surveillance than the Ukrainians. Now, I don't know if this is because Western intelligence allegedly is pouring it all into Ukraine. Right? They got all the analysis. I don't know whether Ukraine is ignoring what they're told, or they merely just feel so superior in their mind that sending 7 Ukrainian tanks against 7 Russian tanks will somehow work in the Ukrainians' favour. Now, I know that defence favours the defender. Hold down tanks, massive earthworks, massive trenches, minefields, spikes, I forget what else. That's crucial, I think, drones as well, have all slowed the Russian war machine. But the Ukrainians, the casualties don't make up for tenacity, doesn't make up for the casualties. Right? It's known as the Spartan defense, right? Where you dig in, put up your shield, and just plant your feet and don't walk back. The problem is, you know what happened to the Spartans? They got wiped out. Not because of human wave tactics. Russia isn't using human wave tactics. If there was, we'd see it. There's a huge reluctance. There's a huge disconnect in the reporting on the war. Most of it, you'll see, remember, ABC, they'll go around the back of the Ukrainian embassy in Poland and claim to be in Kiev. They've been caught doing this several times. They've been caught filming in Ukrainian alleyways near the scene of previous destruction and playing battle music. I mean, battle noises and saying, well, and then a passerby would walk past and stare at them. Yet, there's news outlets, there's no comeuppance. Millions of people tune in to lies every day. Seeing is believing, but when what you're showing isn't true, your brain, it picks up on the disconnect. It knows there's something wrong, even if you don't pay attention. That's why the left are so, angry, because they're trying to shape and alter reality with their warped belief that if you just repeat the lie long enough, that you can manifest destiny. Fake it till you make it. Now, I don't know if cope cages are working for the Russians, because we don't see, but we do see a fact that Russia has a huge amount of Western equipment on display. So clearly, and of course the second fact is you can look at the map and go, oh shit, Russia's got land and more land. Every day, more land. It's maybe not much per day, but it's still adding up. And the top stories, all carefully selected, not based on what I go through. You notice there's many news outlets missing every day from the news. You can't get a full picture based on one or two searches. Zelensky and his assumption should be dismissed as nothing more than the bleating of a desperate fool. because he brings nothing. He's brought nothing to the table. He's said nothing in the last couple of years to ever demonstrate he is nothing more than a puppet, a clown, a fool. So Al Jazeera has shown the map, and it shows the huge contested area. There's a huge contested area. So the prime battlefield is here between Donetsk and Donetsk. Right? That's where the bulk of the fighting is going on right now. And this patch is what's been taken in the last 8.5 months. These two untouched right now. The bit of Zaporozhye and a bit of Kherson. What is expected? Well, the media is expected a lot of talk to be focused on land swapping. I don't think there's going to be a lot of talk about land swapping. I don't expect the leadership talk to last long. I expect the 40 minutes of conversation is merely in the world of diplomacy, it's diplomatic language. But what they do is they have a list of points they go through. And they ask each other's advisors, have you received this? Have you received that? Because remember, every talking point is the title of a document, okay? Details are worked out. Now, these are drafted in a pseudo language that you'll call legalese, okay? So that lawyers will look at it and understand that these phrases and terms have particular meanings, and they have little indexes in the pointing, under international law, X, Y, Z, so, articles of war, what is a war, what constitutes a war crime, what doesn't, what immunity Russia claims to have based on Russian law, where Russia cannot legally hand someone over without a whole... it's almost impossible. I do believe, however, there are exemptions. Like, if Russia takes a prisoner of war, Russia holds foreigners, they could do swaps. So I think also with the land swapping, when the law was passed, right, that's where the line is. So, like, Crimea is off the table because there's a particular Russian law basically that says it's illegal for the Russian government to sign away Crimea. There is a separate law for the recognition of these republics and another law for them joining the Russian Federation. But amongst that will be maps, towns, excluded areas because of Ukrainian occupation. And Ukraine is still claiming, and also then, of course, you got the Ukrainian claim to all of this, which Ukraine says, no, bro, it belongs to us. But nobody asks the question of Ukraine, what are you going to do with the people in that territory? You're not liberating them because they voted against you. They don't like you. You spent, since Ukraine has spent a decade or more trying to drive them off their land and kill them. Ukrainian police have committed extrajudicial murders into the quantity of around 100,000. And you add to that the numerous other war crimes that Kiev has pretty much gotten carte blanche to commit, because the Western media and the European Union and the UN all walk around. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, if the UN is so anti-Western, why do they support Ukraine and support... Because believe it or not, the UN doesn't like Iran. The UN doesn't like Russia. The UN right now is basically the US, India and China carving up the world. Now, whether you want to believe me or not, that's okay. But, I have people commenting all the time and then deleting them. And you think you're funny because you get away with calling me names, all these names under the sun, and then deleting them, and then going around telling everybody that I delete your comments. No, you get deleted. Either you're deleting them or other people are deleting. I mean, these sites are moderated. I don't moderate. But people are making outrageous claims about Ukraine winning this war, and that I'm absolutely a buffoon. Well, you tell me how they're winning. You can't just say Ukraine's winning because it's free, because I pretty much think that, well, Russia's not trying to take Ukraine. That's just the left and their imagination. But far too many people believe the left in their imagination. That's a fact. Now, there's this bullshit about Ukraine and their white angels. Bro, why do you need a second locker in your emergency vehicle? One with a bolted door. That's a passkey bolt, okay? Why do you need a passkey bolt on a evacuation vehicle? Alleged evacuation vehicle. Bro, I think they left the compound in their recruitment van, I think they picked the wrong... I honestly think they're trying to instill the idea that these recruitment vans are actually... These white vans going around are evacuation vehicles with locked doors. Yeah, evacuation. It's voluntary. That's why she needs to be put in a blanket and carried, because she's voluntarily leaving. That look on her face, that's not a smile, That's not a smile. If you can't emotionally read a photograph, that's on you, not me. Okay, the Alaska Summit is the biggest thing to happen in this war, I think. And, of course, the Europeans are trying to maintain some relevance and grab attention by talking with Zelensky. Does that look like winning to you? Coalition of the willing. Willing to do what? Send Ukrainians to their deaths. Why? Ego. Resources but no limits should be placed. Or Russia has no veto against Ukraine's pathway to the EU and NATO. Yay! Or no limits to military aid. Yay, Europe, you're all slaves for the ego of Zelensky, who has voluntary recruitment vans. I mean, it's a police vehicle, so of course it's got a locked door. They're just rescuing her. That's why she's smiling and so excited. That's not blood, that's mud. All right, so now, of course, we know that Ukraine, gotta be careful, Ukraine and Russia both have conditions for a ceasefire. You all know Ukraine's conditions require pretty much Russia to surrender to Ukraine and hand over billions of dollars. And that's the only negotiation Ukraine wants. How much you give me? Greedy Zelensky. Now, there's a joke that used to go around in the 70s and 80s, that any country wanted to rebuild just had to declare war on the United States and get lots of funding. Now, I don't know where this came from, but it was pretty much born out of post-war Europe, and it just warped, and it didn't really have a basis in reality. But it sort of stuck, the idea that all you need is a war if you want it's sort of twisted, because the original statement was, if you ever just wanted to rebuild your economy, all you needed was another war and the US would come in and rebuild you. And I think that's what Ukraine did. Okay? Now, a lot of people do know Ukraine started this war by shelling Donetsk. But I think Trump has moved past that, because both sides have to give. Now, I think in order to appease Europe, Trump can't just sit down with Vladimir Putin, because the left keep barking, "You're Putin's puppet." So that's, they're basically, the left are trying to shape the narrative. Okay? They're trying to basically say, and if Trump does anything other than what the left wants, he's a Putin puppet. And basically the left are so toxic. But Trump does have to do something, okay? And sanctions are far better than having a war that will leave most of Europe, if not most of the world, in ruins and bitterly divided for the next century. And pretty much it will probably be the end of Korea, Taiwan, and many other nations. Because, folks, there's a lot of countries that depend on trade, not just from the United States, but from Russia and China as well, and India. And if you bitterly divide the world into the US and Europe, and then you have the rest, well, a lot of these countries, smaller countries, they're going to lose the bulk of their trade, the bulk of their industry. But the left is so selfish. All they care about is winning. The left always lecture you on how everybody else cares about money. You're the one who always brings it up. Nobody seems to point out that the left are the ones who are totally obsessed with power. But of course, if you note, there hasn't been a big missile strike yet. So Putin is following Trump's request of restraint. So that's what would you say, the first clear signal of a ceasefire? But then again, we are in the middle of an offensive. So it is a mixed signal. When on one hand, Putin has given a little, but on the other, he's still punching Ukraine. But punching them with one hand tied behind their back, binding his back. And of course, fighting. They've taken more territory. But they have not incurred. In fact, they've reshaped this again. There may be some growth here, but they have not gone into Kupiansk. Again, a weird decision. Same again. No offensive here, more here in the lineman area. Again, no advance. But the movement of men and equipment and the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive has led to mass evacuations. Then you notice there's none down here because they were evacuated last month quietly in order to bring in 10,000 Ukrainian troops. Now remember, they only recruited 30,000. So, and 10,000 sitting here, that's a lot of troops who could have been here or here or here or here and possibly made a difference. So now there is fighting here. The Russians have broken through these lines. There is fighting. Right? Shelling. But they're panicking because the Russians are sweeping. Yep. Now, I don't know if this is because the Ukrainians made a miscalculation or just merely ran out of mines, but normally they would have seeded unexploded ordnance in the path of the Russians. These are bomblets, they're pressure detonated, basically, so people could likely come and go in small numbers. Maybe you could get away with kicking them once or twice, but that's about it. But I wouldn't bet my life on it. I would pretty much expect that Ukraine left the corridor trying to hopefully sneak up on the Russians, and the Russians noticed and took advantage and broke through the Ukrainian lines because they want to, and they have. And for some reason, they're using the rail line now as a trench, as a artificial wall for the Ukrainian troops here. So, and they're following it up, basically. So, which is cutting off Rodansk, costing them the Ukrainians territory, and basically the Russians are closing the cauldron, but there's still this road open, which I think is what the Russians wanted, because was it Putin? No, it wasn't Putin. One of the Russian generals was asked, why the cauldron? Why leave a road open? Wasn't a general. It was the guy who died, the head of the Wagner group. He was explaining that they found when they surrounded a Ukrainian, they'll just dig in and fight to the death because they don't want to surrender. But they found when Ukrainians ran out of ammunition, 2 would go for ammunition and only 1 would come back. So that's what they meant. So they wear them down because 2 will go, 1 will come back. The wounded, eventually, all that will be left is the wounded, and the Russians would come in. This is how they capture a lot of Ukrainians. So what they do is they wound the Ukrainians, wearing them down. That actually Russian snipers wound the Ukrainians because it takes more resources to deal with the wounded than the dead. And the wounded are not combat effective. So yes, you hear reports. Now, if you look south in the north, they haven't taken much territory. And in the Chavashar area in the middle, they haven't really done anything. I would thought they would have moved closer up here, but they haven't yet. They are fighting here. I think that's to secure the front line so they can shell Kurminskaya. Yeah, they've taken parts of this territory, but not all of it. They've moved up here to cut this off. this road off completely, which is what they do every time the Ukrainians try to come down this road. They get it. There's fighting. They've moved up a little bit here to protect their flanks, but that's about it. They're not going to. Well, again, I don't know why they haven't shelled all of this today, but they focused here, I think, merely as a because evacuations cost Ukraine a lot of fuel and time, create a lot of panic, and so that's it has benefited the Russians in the past. So that was probably what they did there. Again, here they don't seem to be interested in closing the gap, yet they haven't completely abandoned the idea of closing the gap. I think merely they are clearing out the Ukrainians in the gap. We don't know, but they are most likely going to continue to keep coming to, because in the Ukrainians' eyes, that takes Russians out of the fight. You know what I mean? If Ukrainians are bogged down here, eventually they'll settle down into a détente, where if the Ukrainians stationed here think the Russians aren't going to come past this line, they're not going to come down here to provoke them, and that might actually be what is happening in Chasiv. The Ukrainians aren't provoking the Russians. There isn't much action going on. But yeah, this is the confusing part, because the Russians overrun the Ukrainian positions, but we don't know if this is a forward, basically a thrust. Usually what happens is a probing attack, like 4 tanks will go forward with some motorized vehicles, and followed by a column of men, and they'll go into the town. There'll be some fighting, usually just the vehicles. The men would take position along the outskirts of town. And then basically now, if they've been successful, they'll start house clearing. But the bulk of the troops haven't come up yet. That could be because they're still fighting up here, or still house clearing up here. So often what happens, if you make too many advances, you spread your troops thin, and then you're open to attack on the flanks. But Russia's advanced in several areas with no way of knowing how many casualties, of course. But Ukraine has, of course, done its usual drone attacks on Russia to provoke Putin, because Zelensky wants to be that little smug little dick who goes, nah. I got 200 drone attacks and you only got 199. I'm the winner. I'm the big man. I'm Zelensky. Now, Ukraine, of course, has criticised itself. Many Ukrainians. Now, there's a growing opposition in that most of the political parties, most of whom aren't communist, by the way, they're merely, and some of them are rather nationalist themselves, are saying Zelensky and his party have serious not-see problems, and nobody wants to see them. Europe doesn't want to address the not-see problem. But the Russian Foreign Ministry says, hey, one of the biggest problems to peace with Ukraine, apart from the fact Ukraine wants to violate its agreements with Russia to remain neutral, is the Nazis, who are trying to rewrite Ukrainian history to say the Nazis were the good guys. Yeah. And Canada cheered them, if you remember. But, again, according to the Russians, Ukraine allegedly has been developing its own missile technology based on the stockpiles left over from the Soviet Union. These are intermediate range missiles. Now, according to the Russian armed forces, they've thwarted a missile production plant. It's a mistake to make, you know? It is a huge mistake. They should just say, we hit a missile production plant and moved on. Because information, it's already in the hands of the West. It's a feedback loop, right? The West has long acquired lots of Russian technology, and now they're feeding it back into Ukraine to piss Russia off, to provoke Russia. But Poland, not very happy with Ukraine right now, because there was a march of Ukrainians with Nazi flags at a rap concert in Poland. The UIA, a paramilitary force that committed ethnic crimes against Polish ethnic Poles. And according to the Polish Prime Minister, the Polish president is pretty much a coward who won't stand up to Ukraine. And he's right. Not just Ukraine. Should have called him a coward who won't stand up to the EU, because ultimately the EU is turning a blind eye. That's why it's the Nazi party, right? Nothing to see here, folks. All right, so 2 hours ago, the time and place was announced. Putin has probably arrived by now, and no updates will come out until later today. (11 a.m. Russian time. So I think that's another. No, actually, yeah, half an hour, basically, from the time that. About when the video uploads is when Putin's plane touches down. Now, the conversation will be one-on-one. There'll be translators. The delegation will do their, they'll swap their papers. They'll check their check boxes, make sure they've got everything. Realistic combat strategy. Yeah, the realistic combat strategy is, had Ukraine focused on areas of stopping the... Ukraine left a lot of roads, bridges, a lot of things intact. They didn't put a lot of secondary and tertiary defenses in place because they expected to have a huge counterattack of 1 million Ukrainians. Hasn't happened. There's been no mass uprising against Russia. The apathy in Ukraine is growing, and recruitment is slowing down. Many, many times, right? You've seen that Putin has a grind set, and that if the Russian army doesn't make advances, they change locations. Now, lo and behold, the United Kingdom has basically scaled back its plans, the so-called reassurance forces. 30,000. You mean they're going to send the entire UK army? This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that this is why, however, of course, Sky Captain Zelensky, the savior of Europe, is why they bankrupt society, so they can have big armies and play army men with real lives. Folks, you think the left are anti-war? You don't know your history. We have lots of wars that go unreported every day. But the fact that, the French and the English just keep bleating that Russia's an existential threat, and yet it still hasn't happened. And again, this is the Cold War mentality, of bleating the threat, panicking the people, winding them up every day with fear. And none of them stop to think. Now, there has been a lot of talk recently about corruption in Ukraine. There's been no movement in 3 weeks on the corruption in Ukraine. Okay? There's been outrage and then nothing. Nobody's cut Zelensky off. The Europeans have done nothing other than wag their little fingers, their stubby, fat little fingers at him. So that nothing's ever going to get done about the corruption in Ukraine. Now, the New York Times, it's pretty much why Putin thinks he has the upper hand. I wonder why. But they said the quiet part out loud. Zelensky's been sidelined. And wait, this page is updated. Where is it? This page is updated. Where's the European article? Damn it. Here we go. Still here. Just not at the top anymore. Zelensky's been sidelined, but where is it? Yeah. Why would Russia think they have the advantage? Oh, wait, they made swift battlefield advances. So, President Trump spoke with European leaders, and they've agreed with Trump about his strategy. This is after they sidelined Zelensky. Not just the only one who's speaking to Zelensky was Merkel 2.0. Basically, even Europe was saying, Germany, go play in the corner. Here's some oven mitts and a football helmet. Go play in the corner. Here's a padded cell for you to play in. So there we are. That's where we're at. Okay? Don't shoot the messenger. If you want to support Ukraine, there's the front line. Go for it. But don't cry when you find out war has no glory, has no clear victor, and the price has always been higher than you've led to believe. That the price is too high. Most people who've gone to war have told me it wasn't worth it. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. And please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon. Buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Please and thank you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.